So this is a big development here, and it's by walls, and it's the Shangana. It's the former Shangana prison. Alright guys, we're going to try something a little bit different today. Got a lot of questions about how to get started as a real estate investor or a property developer and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things about having 30 years of experience, makes me sound very old when I say that. I was just working out 30 years is actually approximately 1,500 weeks. It doesn't sound as much when you say it like that, but anyway. So real estate investment, I'm not going to talk about, there's so many different ways that you might be able to kind of advise somebody on getting in. What I'll do is I'll explain how I got into it, and you can have a look and see if there are any parallels with your own experience. But when I was starting out 30 years ago, I was looking, I knew I wanted to get into property. I was studying architecture, and I got kind of obsessed with the idea of becoming an architect when I was a teenager. And after becoming an architect and spending a couple of years working as an architect, I got a little bit disillusioned with it because I was not making anything like the kind of money that I needed in order to have the lifestyle that I wanted. And I can remember I was working for a couple in Ranelagh, and this couple had me doing up their house. And I can remember I spent literally months on this project, and for the total fee of £8,000. Now, if you break that down into it's about 1,000 a month that I was getting paid by this couple, which, because I was only starting out, it was the only income that I had coming in. So that's equivalent to about £12,000 a year at the time. It was in old money. And so if you fast forward to about a year into that, I had about 25,000 in my bank, and that 25,000 was all the money I had. I was trying to think, what can I do with it? I was looking for a property that I could afford, and I was so inexperienced, I didn't even know that you should go out and you should borrow money to buy property. I was just of the view that I didn't want to have borrowings. I thought debt was bad, and what I would much rather do is have just outright ownership of something. I was really, really green, literally hadn't a clue. And so fast forward, I found a piece of land in the west coast of Ireland, very cheap. It was in a small village on the coast, and it was about 1 acre of land. So I have an acre of land that I bought for 25,000. And the only skills I had going, I had no idea how to value, how to do any kind of financial analysis or anything. But what I did know how to do was to get planning permission for a couple of other houses, because I had studied architecture. I was practicing now as a very sort of junior architect, but a qualified one at that. So I submitted plans to build 4 houses on this acre of land in this small village on the west coast of Ireland. And after I obtained planning permission, I started speaking to local estate agents, although they were called auctioneers. And I found a small guy that had an office in the town that I was in. And I said to him, can I get your advice, please? I want to know how much a house sold from this property would make me. And what I was trying to do, even though I didn't understand it at the time, was I was trying to work back from, if I sell it for this price, then what do I have to build it for? I mean, when I say I was green, I was really, really green and pretty clueless about the whole process. And so the next thing that I did was I just said to the guy, look, go away and get me some prices. And if you know any builders in this area, please connect me with them, because I really needed to figure out. I wasn't a builder myself. I had no idea how I was going to build these properties. So I just thought to myself, okay, what I better do is get him to introduce me to a builder from the local area. So off he goes, and a week later I call him, have you got any news for me? And he says, Gavin, I do have some interesting news. He says, I have found a builder, and the builder has a proposition for you. he wants to buy the land with the planning that you have. And I was like, come on, I asked you to introduce me to a builder so I can do this stuff myself because I want to be a property developer. And he said, well, can I give you his proposal? And I said, well, yes, go ahead. And he tells me that he's willing to pay $125,000 for this little 1 acre site. And I can remember when I heard that, my mind was blown, because I was earning $8,000 for nearly a year's work, and suddenly in one small property deal, $100,000 profit. And it just blew my mind. And so that was the beginning of my journey. That was, I guess, the catalyst. And what I mean by that is, like, up until that point, I wanted to do architecture and property. After that moment, I only wanted to do property. I knew, well, I felt architecture was a lost cause. And my view was, like, I had studied architecture for 5 years. I enjoyed the process of design and everything. But as an architect, most of the time I was spent chasing work and chasing to get paid for the work that I had done. And so it was not as rewarding as I was hoping it would be. Whereas making all this money in a single deal, I started to extrapolate and think, you know what, a couple of years from now, I will be my own client. I'll actually have the money to go and buy property, do it up, and I'll do all the design work myself. And so that was my thinking behind it. Now, I had to get to the next step. And the next step was, so I have 100,000, that's great, I've made a nice profit, but if I deploy that on another piece of land, then I'm going to be back to zero. So how am I going to actually make money whilst I'm trying to become a developer or an investor? And so what I did was, it was wasn't so subtle, but I changed my focus in the architectural business from doing architecture to what I called development management. And so suddenly, rather than being a person that was being paid as an architect, I was now charging a fee as a development manager. So if you came to me with a piece of land, I would go off and I would design it, and I would put it through the legals, I put it through all of the financials, I would go and attract tenants and all that. Now, I'm skipping ahead a little bit. Before I did that, I recognized when I had made the profit that I was kind of lucky getting that profit. The 100,000 that I made was a little bit of a fluke, and it wasn't lost on me that it was a bit of a fluke. And so what I decided I needed to have more education in the property space. I needed to understand how valuation was done. I needed to understand all this. So I remember seeing a course. It was a postgraduate degree. It was a master's degree, and it was in planning and development. And it was in the same college that I had studied architecture. So I was familiar with the place. It was called the Dublin Institute of Technology at the time. It's got a different name today, and it was in Bolton Street. And so, having spent 5 years in Bolton Street, I was back now, going to Bolton Street in the evenings for 2 years, studying a master's in planning and development. But that opened my eyes so much. Suddenly I understood the process of valuation. I understood how to do residual valuations, and all of these things are important as an investor and as a developer. And so that was the beginning. And then armed with that new knowledge and that education and that master's degree, all right, the battery ran out on the camera. I'm going to have to revert to the phone, and I wonder, will this be any good? It's going to be a bit shaky maybe. So where was I? I started with my new education and master's degree. I started to say to potential clients that I can do development management for you. I have a master's in planning and development, and I'm able to do all of the financial analysis, all of this stuff. And what it meant was that I now had what was viewed by the market as a higher skill than just the architecture on its own. And suddenly I can remember the first project that I did. I took on a project developing an apartment block of 22 apartments with 5 retail shops on the ground. And this project, I took it all the way from the very beginning to the end, to the sale of the property and all that kind of stuff. And in the process of doing that, I picked up so much knowledge. I really understood the process inside out, and I was doing it with other people's money, which made it quite reassuring for me, but also a real eye-opener, because I was behind the numbers. Like I was reporting the numbers to the partners that owned this property, and so I knew everything that was going on. And it was just such a I just learned so much. It was really invaluable. So armed with all of that knowledge, I started to actually get confident enough to go off after the bigger deals. And what I mean by the bigger deals is I had seen these clients doing stuff and borrowing money, and I suddenly went, okay, so borrowing money is not a bad thing, so to speak. If you borrow money, it can allow you to go after a deal. And so let's say you borrow 500,000, you have a strong chance of making maybe 500,000 back at the end of the project. And so I suddenly realized that this was an essential step that I'd been missing up until that point. So went and I bought a property for 600,000, as it turns out, and I borrowed probably about 500,000. I put my 100,000 that I had into the project, and by that stage I was earning fees from the development management business that I had created, so I had enough money coming in to kind of keep the show on the road. But I was now my own client, and I took this unit, and it was just a big huge unit, big open plan unit, and I split it into 3 different smaller units, and then I rented those units out. And when I rented them out, the value all increased. And of course I know now that this is basically arbitrage, where you buy an asset that is large and you split it up into something smaller, and the sum of the smaller parts is a lot more than the sum of the one single large part. And after doing that, when I eventually sold that property that I bought for 600, I think I paid 680 for it if I remember. I sold that property for 3.7 million. And I can remember that was the moment when my mind was blown for the second time. And I realized, whoa, this property business is the business. I want to do this. And I went all in very aggressively from that point on. All right, so what are the lessons there? I mean, I'm not going to spend forever telling you about the other deals that I did, but long story short, that one deal opened up just an enormous amount of opportunity for me. And over the next 4 or 5 years, I doubled and I doubled and I doubled again, and I just kept on making so much money. And so I had massive success really, really quickly. But one of the mistakes that I made was not having a mentor. Now, the difference, there's a distinction here between an education and a mentor. The education that I did in the university where I got my master's, that gave me the skills to start charging more. And that was fantastic. I understood how to do valuations, I understood all the kind of mechanics of it. But when it came to the mentor, I was missing a mentor. My father had died, so I had no idea. I had nobody to really call upon for advice. And also you need to, if you're going to have a mentor working for you or working with a mentor, what you want is somebody that you respect, somebody that has done it before, and so they kind of have been through what you're going through. And so I had all the success, and I was, there was people offering me advice, but they had never done anything like this, and they had never seen this kind of success. So I didn't really feel that they had relevant knowledge for me to be able to use. So, get a mentor. So speaking about mentors, what's the difference? Well, the distinction is that if you have somebody that has been through it all and has many more years of experience that you do, they've gone through this whole thing. They've gone through the cycles. I didn't understand at the time that you can go through massive disruptive cycles in the property market. I kind of figured that I would see the signs early and that I would react early and that I wouldn't get damaged by it. But as it turns out, that's not how it works. Usually some sort of an event triggers a market downturn, or certainly that's what can happen. You can get impacted by an event, you can get impacted by the economy just sort of shrinking or whatever. You can get impacted by your own emotions, and you can get impacted by your ego. That's the 4 R's, and I created a video on that. I'll link it up above if you want to go and watch that video after this. But going back to the mentor, had I had a mentor at the time, somebody I respected and somebody who'd been through it all, he could well have tapped me on the shoulder and just said, Gavin, what you're experiencing right now does not happen in normal life as a developer or as a property investor. You're going through some sort of extraordinary run of luck, and you really need to prepare for when the next deal goes bad. And had I had that advice, I would have avoided the trouble that I got into in the next big deal. Now, I won't go into it in too much detail here, but the next big deal was I was looking around for property to invest in. In Ireland, I'd made many millions at this stage, and I was very confident that I could make money easily, and got a bit, it went to the head, got a bit cocky, started taking shortcuts. But what's worse than that is I couldn't find any deals that made sense in Ireland. It was like the prices all just seemed excessive to me, and so I thought, you know what I'll do? I'll look abroad, because maybe I can find better value abroad. And that was a big error, and I think probably a mentor would have pointed that out to me, but had no mentor. And so I went down to Spain, and when I was in Spain, I bought a nice villa, or not a villa, I had bought an apartment at the time. I ended up buying a villa later, but I bought an apartment, and this apartment was adjacent to a site, and the site was about to start construction, and I was speaking to the salesperson for it, and he told me all about it, showed me plans and everything, and I just went, this is the deal I'm going to go for. And it was a mega deal. Now, it actually grew. My ambitions kind of grew over time. I started out thinking I'd buy a piece of it, and I ended up wanting the entire thing. And so you learn, you live and learn. So what are the takeaways from this particular lesson? The first one is that psychology and your mindset and all that is so much a part of investing that you have to pay close attention to it. One of the things that now I pay a huge amount of attention to it, but you have to analyze the quality of your thoughts as you're making decisions around investment. Sometimes you can fall in love with it. I mentioned the 4 E's, like your emotions can get involved. You can fall in love with a property, and when you fall in love with a property, your rational thought and your logical kind of thinking can go out the window. You lose the ability to make a proper judgment. And I found that to be the case. I found there's various things called cognitive bias. Those things started to interrupt the quality of my thought. Things like confirmation bias. That is where you make a decision before you have the information, and then you start looking for the information to support the decision. It should be the other way around. So psychology, mindset, analysis of your thoughts, and just being humble. Understand that you can make mistakes in property. Understand that it is possible to be wrong. And when you're starting out, you lack confidence. And so a lot of the time when you lack confidence, you are very, very cautious. You carefully move forward. You'll analyze everything. But then as you get some success, as you start to do better, you will start to feel a lot more confidence. And then all of a sudden the mindset changes and you're like, I know all of this, everything's fine, I know exactly what I'm doing. And that's the point where you actually have to tap yourself on the shoulder and say, no, you don't. be careful about this. This is where you are now exposed potentially. One of the analogies I use is the gambler analyst analogy, and the way I see it is, okay, as I like to say, let's go and land the plane now. We're talking about the gambler and the analyst sort of analogy, and what I like to kind of say is that there's a spectrum. One side of the spectrum is the gambler, the other side of the spectrum is the analyst. And what a lot of people have is a kind of a tendency to be one side of that spectrum or the other. You're either a gambler or you're an analyst. And if you're a gambler, you're going to spend an enormous amount of time looking for deals and jumping into them. I often talk about this on my podcast. I'll put a link up above if you want to go and check that out, by the way. The analyst will spend all their time sort of going over the numbers, analysing the deal, looking for more information. And what usually happens to the analyst is that they get what's known as paralysis by analysis. And you end up in a situation where the deal has passed and you're still crunching the numbers. That's happened to me before. I've actually, not to me, it happened to the person who wanted to buy the property from me, and I snuck in and I bought it as the gambler, and they had to come along and pay me a big premium to get it off me afterwards. But being a gambler doesn't really help you either. Now what it will mean is that you get your hands on a lot of deals early, which is great, but you can rush into deals. And so what that means is that you can be careless, you can make mistakes, and you can be kind of reckless. And it happened to me. I went and I bought a load of deals, and when the prices were going up, this was great. But when the market turned, that's when all of a sudden those deals that you did that were kind of marginal, that really comes home to roost. And being a gambler in that situation is a complete disaster. You end up with a whole load of property that you borrowed a load of money on and you were unable to pay for. Yeah, first of all, nobody wants a deal that isn't a very good deal when the market turns. When the market is hyped up, people are looking for deals everywhere, and so you can often sell a bad property to somebody else. But when the market is very hot, that's easy. When the market is, in a bad way, it's very difficult to even sell good property. And if you have a bad one, good luck. You want to try and find yourself a place somewhere in the middle. So you're neither a gambler nor an analyst. You're kind of sitting middle way.